this is an issue that came up actually in my conversation with Ed Hussein. Now, I'll start with the tricky issue of Muhammad's wives. I brought up the fact that Muhammad is alleged to have had a 6-year-old wife and consummated when she was 9, which is obviously a very difficult or inconvenient issue, inconvenient thing. But he said I was wrong. He said that firstly, that was contested. Secondly, that was the evidence of that was written 90 years later. And there is other evidence that that specific wife was actually older. I'm quite interested by that. And seeing as you've studied it, do you think Ed is right in saying that, or is there more to the story about?
No, that just shows you the kind of dishonesty you get involved in.
What's the truth about that young wife?
One thing is true, that all our knowledge of the lives of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, are based on literary evidence, which some of it dates more than 300 years after his supposed death. So there are no surviving extant, documents which are contemporaneous with Muhammad,
Including the Quran.
Including the Quran. We don't know what the origin of the Quran. In my view, the Quran has very little to do with somebody called Muhammad. But that's another issue.
We'll come back to that.
Come back. So our knowledge, Hussein is right in one sense, that our knowledge of all the his wives, what he did, and so on, are contained in the Hadith. The Hadiths were written over 300 years after his death. So how can but see, somebody like Hussein will argue about the details of his life, but when it becomes inconvenient, he will bring up the idea of lateness of the sources. But if they're late, they're late for everything. I mean, not a single aspect of his life is authentic. It's all made up centuries later, and it's true that in order to sanctify, to justify a current practice, many people invented hadith and then retrojected it to this mythical past to justify present practices. So if you had somebody who was into young girls, he comes up with this story that Muhammad was married to a 9-year-old, or 8-year-old, consummated when she was 9. Well, I forget the detail. And this is true for all these things, like stoning to death for adultery and so on and so on. So either you throw out everything that we know, supposedly that we know about Muhammad, you pick and choose. But then, I mean, why is one story better than the other? And then you come up with this nonsense about the wonderful memories. You have to invent how the Arabs had this fantastic memory and they could remember things over 200 years. And they passed down this tradition. You had this long list of chain of authorities. In fact, if you look at all the hadith, they're incredibly childish. You have the story of a bunch of men, soldiers, sitting around a campfire. And he says, I remember the Prophet saying to me once that one mustn't use a toothpick after eating something.
The first time I sat down to read the Hadith, I think maybe the third passage was about farting. It's about when it was appropriate to fart and not fart.
Right.
So, yeah.
How anybody can take any of this nonsense seriously. And that Western scholars, historians, have accepted it for all these years. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable how they've been uncritical in their look at the sources for our knowledge of early Islam. So that's why I think we don't know where this book called the Quran actually comes from. We really don't. The stories of it's been passed down through oral tradition, and that it is just nonsense, a complete nonsense.
So where the moderate Muslims, though, might be right is that you don't necessarily have to take it literally, because we don't know what's true and what's literal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so actually is there not room for hope there that given that we don't know, then you could say there's legitimate reasons that you can edit out or change things?
Yeah, I agree.
Because you could
but
challenge
you would
the
have to
legitimacy of
then
the sources.
say that our knowledge of the Quran, where it came from, is pretty shaky.
What do we know anything at all that we can say? Do you agree that there was a man called Muhammad in the Arabian desert?
I'm not certain that there was somebody called Muhammad. No, it is very, very much rather a coincidence. This name, which means the praised one, that he should have had this name. It's just not. It's just not credible. I think what happened is a bit like Robin Hood. Okay. This traditional story of Robin Hood, as seen in the movies of Errol Flynn or somebody, Little John, Prior Tuck, of the minstrel, forgot his name. These are obviously literary creations. There may have been some rebel, was it 12th century, 11th century, I forget. Robin Hood is 11th, it's time of the Crusades, 10th, 11th century. There may have been somebody in 11th century who occasionally attacked rich merchants or somebody. But the rest of the story that we know, which has been passed down to us, is literary creation.
A better analogy might be King Arthur, because
that's another one.
King Arthur, we don't know that there's no evidence that it existed, but it's possible that there was someone fighting the Anglo-Saxons coming over some sort of Britain, and he is the foundational myth in some ways of England's national myth.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so Muhammad, you don't accept that there's necessarily a real Muhammad, but what happened immediately after Muhammad suggests that there was some sort of inspiration, because straight away you have this conquest from that region that spreads out across the world, as you described earlier. So something happened that inspired that.
I wouldn't know how to characterize that. Did they consciously create a myth? I don't know. I really don't know.
As well as speaking to Ed Hussein, I spoke to Ayan Hirsi Ali, our mutual friend, and her take on it is that there was Muhammad at the time of Mecca, a peaceful man trying to spread some good messages, and this ties in with Ed's version, is that after a period of time his message wasn't getting anywhere, so you get the Medina version of Muhammad, who is a fighter, a warmonger, and with the Medina version of Muhammad, we have associated all the parts of the Quran which are far more anti-Semitic, far more brutal. Do you accept any of that narrative?
No, not of it.
What's wrong with that narrative?
None of it makes any sense.
Tell me why Ayan and Ed are both wrong then.
This is based on the traditional picture. The notion of Mecca and Medina is already a literary construct made by the apologists of Islam. There's no evidence that Islam started in Mecca. Absolutely none whatsoever. It's all based on literary sources 200 years afterwards, including the Mecca and Medina business. Really, now, even on their own account, it doesn't make sense, because even if you accept this traditional picture of Mecca and Medina, It's, in fact, the bullet, so early and later. Early Mecca, later Medina. In fact, the so-called verses of the sword, some of them, in fact, are early. They're not later.
How do you know they're earlier?
Well, exactly. This is another. Exactly. How would you decide?
Okay.
The whole thing is nonsense. That's why I.
Thanks for watching this clip from The Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode. And for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.